Microorganisms are everywhere around us, and their presence affects us humans and our environment in some very real and significant ways. For example, we regularly eat and breathe viruses, fungal cells, and bacteria. Some of us drink protozoa in our water. These microbes are part of our body tissues in some cases, and they live on our body tissues in others. Microbes are covering the surfaces of the room that you're in right now. My goal for this part of Chapter 1 is to introduce you to these tiny organisms and help you to understand what they're doing for us in our world. By the end of this video, you should be able to define the word microbiology and state the disciplines that it encompasses. You should also be able to describe how microorganisms are named and name at least 3 ways that microorganisms are involved in our lives. So one of the first things that we should do in this chapter is define microbiology. What is microbiology? Microbiology is the scientific study of living organisms and particles that are too small to be seen with the naked eye. So that means we're going to study living things, but we're also going to study some non-living things as well. But the one characteristic that kind of connects all of these things together is that they're too small to be seen with the naked eye. You need some sort of microscope to observe them. So when we talk about microorganisms or microbes, we're talking about living organisms like bacteria, certain types of fungi, protozoa, archaea, some algae, parasitic worms, and then you have some non-living infectious particles like viruses and prions as well. Microbiology is a multidisciplinary field, so that means that although you have one major heading that's microbiology, there are several subdisciplines that fall under that heading. So for example, someone who's studying bacteria would be in the field of bacteriology, but that's a compartment or a component of microbiology. Someone who studies protozoa, they're studying protozoology. Someone who studies fungi, they're studying mycology. Someone who studies algae is in the field of phycology. Someone who studies your animal parasites, your parasitic helminths, that would be like your parasitic worms, they're in the field of parasitology. Someone who studies viruses would be in the area of virology. And believe it or not, in a microbiology department, very often you'll have people who are studying immunology. They want to know how the immune system interacts with microorganisms, both when we're healthy and also when we're infected or diseased. Now, a lot of times when I talk about microorganisms, the first thing that comes to people's mind is disease and all the bad things that microorganisms can be responsible for. I want you to know that most microorganisms are actually harmless and many of them are actually helpful. Let me give you a few examples. Bacteria are instrumental in treating sewage. I don't know how much you know about sewage, but that pipe that runs probably under your house and goes to a sewage treatment plant dumps sewage into a large pan or tank, kind of like what you see here. This is called a settling basin. So solid waste settles out of solution, and then the liquid that's left on top gets dosed with a complement of bacteria, archaea, and other microbes that will actually break down the organic and inorganic waste that is coming from your toilet. Now, your bacteria and archaea aren't the only ones that are in that settling basin. You also will have some protozoa as well. Bacteria and fungi are often used to produce foodstuffs, kind of like this blue cheese that you see here. Bacteria and fungi like yeast are responsible for producing very yummy fermented foods like olives, pickles, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and then cheeses like brie, camembert, blue cheese. And I don't know about you, but I love bread. You can't make good bread without yeast. Yeast are microorganisms. So they're really useful in producing delicious food for us. And then I like to breathe. Do you like to breathe? About 50 to 80% of the oxygen that is in our atmosphere actually comes from our oceans. There are microorganisms called phytoplankton in our seas, and they are photosynthetic. So that means they're taking in carbon dioxide, they are combining that with a little bit of energy and water to make sugar to drive their growth. As a waste product, they produce oxygen, which dissolves into ocean water and eventually it gases out into our atmosphere so that we can inhale and continue to live. As part of Chapter 1, I will describe all of the major groups of microorganisms and give examples of each. You will need to be able to give, with correct spelling, an example for each group, along with a disease that the microbe causes or a role that it plays in our world. This is a microbiology class. We should be able to name some microbes, right? To help with naming, let's pause for a few minutes to remember how organisms, including microorganisms, are named. All living organisms are divided into three large groups called domains. The three domains of life are eukarya, which includes plants and animals, but also microorganisms like fungi and protozoa. You have bacteria, which includes all of your bacteria, pathogens and non-pathogens. And then you have archaea, which includes all of your archaea. The three domains are based upon differences in the nucleotide sequence of the 16S ribosomal RNA among the different cell types. In other words, the three groups are chemically distinct from each other on a molecular level. Now, I'm sure you remember from your bio class a mnemonic device, something like dumb kids playing catch on freeways get smashed, which basically gives you the scientific taxonomy in order. So you'll remember that domains are subdivided into smaller groups called kingdoms, and kingdoms are subdivided into smaller groups called phyla. Phyla are subdivided into smaller groups called classes. Classes are subdivided into smaller groups called orders. Orders are subdivided into smaller groups called families. Families are made up of genera, and then genera are made up of species. So the idea here is that we start out with large groups here at the top that are full of many thousands of organisms, including microorganisms, and then we're going to gradually parse these out into smaller and smaller groups so that by the time we get all the way down here to species, we're referring to one specific type of organism instead of several thousand. You may also remember from your bio class that when we talk about naming organisms in biology, we often use something called binomial nomenclature. In binomial nomenclature, each living organism is given a two-part name that consists of the genus name and the species name. The genus name is always capitalized. The species name is never capitalized. You sometimes have the genus and species together, and when both names are present, the genus always comes first before the species. and you always have the species placed last. When you're typing binomial nomenclature, you'll want to always italicize the genus and species or underline them. Now, you may also know that sometimes instead of writing out the entire genus name like this, we just abbreviate it. So we'll say E. coli instead. When we do that, the genus name is still capitalized and the species name is still lowercase. Occasionally, scientists, instead of writing the species, they'll do something like this. So you'll have Escherichia, and I'm not going to waste your time by writing all of the whole name out, but you'll have Escherichia, and then you'll have SSP listed afterwards. In this case, where the species name is not written out, we're just referring to the genus only. We're no longer describing a specific species of cell. Okay, let's focus on microorganisms. The scientific names of microorganisms can be descriptive. Typically, the names pay honor to a scientist. So, for example, Escherichia coli honors Theodor Eschrich, the first person who actually isolated the germ. Klebsiella pneumoniae honors Edwin Klebs, the scientist who did the most work with it and characterized it. Sometimes these names come from the disease that the organism causes. So for example, Klebsiella pneumoniae gets pneumonia because this bacterium causes pneumonia. Salmonella typhimurium, the typhi comes from the fact that the bacterium causes stupor, and the muri here comes from mice, so it causes stupor in mice. Sometimes the name for a microorganism might describe the microbe's shape or the arrangement that it makes. So for example, Streptococcus here. Strepto means chain, chain-like, and then coccus means spherical. Other times, the bacterium is named based upon where it lives. So E. coli, the coli here refers to the colon, which is where we're going to find E. coli bacterium living. Let's do a little check to see what you remember. Which of the following is not a properly written scientific name? Would it be number 1, Escherichia coli, number 2, E. coli, number 3, Escherichia sp, or number 4, Escherichia coli? Right, the last one is incorrect. Remember, in binomial nomenclature, we're going to have a genus name and a species name. The genus name always comes first, so that's Escherichia, and it's always capitalized. In number 4, the E is not capitalized. The species name always follows the genus name, that's the coli, and remember that the species name is always lowercased. Which of the following is not a domain? Is it number 1, archaea, number 2, fungi, number 3, eukarya, or number 4, bacteria? You may want to pause the video, think of your answer, and then press play when you're ready to continue. Right. Fungi is a kingdom, not a domain. Remember, there are 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. True or false? Microbiology only considers living organisms that are too small to be seen with the naked eye. Did you say false? I hope you did. Remember that microbiology also considers viruses, which are non-living particles, and prions, which are misfolded proteins. Both of these are not living organisms, but they're still studied in microbiology. So the answer is false here. And that's it for this video. We began with a definition for microbiology. Remember, it's the scientific study of organisms that are too small to be seen with the naked eye. You need a microscope. The fact that microbiology is a scientific study means that people ask questions about these tiny organisms, and then they planned and performed experiments to answer those questions. The answers are the basis for further investigations into the microbial world. We also reviewed binomial nomenclature, a system of giving organisms two names to identify them. We learned that those names can be descriptive, and they can tell us who discovered or characterized the organism, where it's found, what disease it might cause, or something about its shape or appearance. Remember, in binomial nomenclature, the name comes from the genus and the species for the living organism. Last but not least, I mentioned at least 3 ways that microorganisms are involved in our lives. I talked about their role in sewage treatment, food production, and oxygen production. In my next videos, we'll explore the different groups of microorganisms and further roles that they play in our lives.